Good morning. My name is Karen Schultz, and I'm your liturgist this morning. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35, the walk to Emmaus. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all of the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and in word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. Their companions were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them and in the breaking of the bread. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, choir. One thing I heard last Sunday, they had a guest preacher there too, and there was a little quote. For those of you who aren't going to listen to anything else I say after this, this is something good to remember. He was talking about the importance of doing small things, and he said it was a quote from Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela. He wasn't sure. I don't know either, but he said, "If you doubt the importance of small things, try sleeping with a flea." When Jacob was 13, there was a revival at his church, and one night they showed a movie to the youth about a fellow who had been a gang member but was now a street preacher in the inner city. Afterward, the youth were invited to come forward and someone would pray for them. And before he knew what he was doing, Jacob found himself kneeling at the altar rail with someone's hands on his head. He couldn't say exactly why he did that, except that it was nice to have someone pray especially for him. When he finished school, Jacob didn't know what he wanted to do except that he wanted to travel, and so he did, and he went places and he saw things, amazing things. Some of them designed and built by people, some of them shaped and molded by God. When the money ran out, he went home. And on the train, he met a young woman with the most beautiful brown eyes, and they talked and talked and talked. And without realizing it, they talked till the moon faded away in the morning light. They exchanged names and addresses, but they never saw each other again, partly because they wrote letters, and the letters never compared to the conversation, and they both had sense enough to know that sometimes a song is so good, no encore can ever do it justice. When Jacob was 26, he got married. When he was 30, driving taxi cabs for a living, but still without much direction in life, he got a call from an old friend who was working with someone who was as yet not very well established, but had ideas and ambitions and needed some help. Would he like the job? Jacob and his family would have to move across the state, but after talking it over with his wife, they decided to go. And when he met those who he would be working with and saw the way they lived, he knew that that was just right, and that was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. It's not important for me to tell you what it was. Not everyone knows what it is to love working with animals that are unwanted and neglected and abused, but everyone knows what it is to love doing something. When he was 40, Jacob was sitting in the church that he attended now and then, and in the middle of the prayer that they call the Great Thanksgiving, somewhere after the Holy, 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 the minister was speaking, but Jacob heard a different voice, and he knew that all of a sudden he had met someone who had been looking for him for a long time. He didn't make a great big deal about it, but quietly on his own he tried to learn how to pray, and he read the parts of Scripture that he could understand, and he and his family joined the church, a fact that went almost unnoticed among their circle of friends, a circle that gradually began to change. He and his wife began to give of their time and substance to the church, and their interest began to change bit by bit. When he was 50, Jacob's son was living with a woman to whom he was not married, and Jacob didn't like it, but he never said anything about it to anyone. The woman had a 9-year-old girl from a previous relationship, and Jacob loved her like any grandfather would. The girl had a rare disease, though, the name of which Jacob could not pronounce, though if the truth be told, he did not want to pronounce it, as if by not saying he could make it like it wasn't. But when she was in the hospital and none of the treatments were doing any good at all, and he couldn't wish it away, he felt helpless, not knowing what he could say, what he could do, what he could give her to make it better. But she gave something to him, a poem that she had written about a world full of peace, from giraffes to humans to lions and geese. No more sickness, no more crying, no more hatred, no more dying, no more handicaps, no more drugs, no more cancer, only hugs. So that's what Jacob did. He hugged her, and she hugged him back. When he was 70, Jacob had some chest pains that he thought was maybe a heart attack, but it wasn't. The medics took him to the hospital anyway. One warm summer night, not long after, he was sitting outside at home enjoying a cool breeze and looking up at the stars in the sky, and they seemed brighter, and there seemed to be more of them than he ever remembered seeing before. And he began to cry. His wife, who was in the kitchen putting a few things away, called to him, said it was time to go to bed, but he didn't get up. And when she called him again, he didn't respond. So with her heart in her throat, she went over to where he was and saw tears running down his face. Though relieved to see that he was alive and breathing, she began to worry when he would not stop crying and could not say why. She called their neighbor, who was a nurse, to come look at him. And what she said was, I've only seen it once or twice before, but one of my friends runs a Catholic retreat house a few miles out in the country, and I've talked to her some about it. I think your husband is having a spiritual crisis. Spiritual crisis? Jacob's wife asked. Yeah, he'll be okay, said the neighbor. For now, just let him be. The next morning, his eyes dry and clear, Jacob got up and fixed breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. But all in all, after that, people didn't see much change in his behavior, except that he seemed fonder of young children than he had been, and he was more inclined to taking walks by himself. Aside from that, though, he was same old Jacob. When he was 80, Jacob got out of bed quite suddenly one night because he thought someone had called his name, and getting out of bed, he left his body behind. He went a little way and met that someone, the same someone the Hebrew people call Yahweh, which means something like the one who is. Jacob went right up to the one who is and said, I'm glad to see you, and I want to thank you for calling me in church when I was 40 and for meeting me in all those stars, and I just wish I had known you sooner. The one who is just smiled and said, Jacob, do you remember watching the sunrise with a certain brown-eyed young woman on a train? Yes, said Jacob. And do you remember falling in love with your work? Yes, yes. And as the light dawned upon him, he said, oh, so it was you all the time. And I guess that was you who put your hands on my head when I was 13. And it was you hugging me in the hospital. Yes. Yes, said the one who is, yes. It was late afternoon or early evening of the first day of the week. Two disciples of Jesus were making their way home from Jerusalem, trying to pick up the pieces of a shattered faith and get on with their lives. Filled with grief, sad, discouraged, walking into the sunset. Some of the women said they saw a vision of angels that morning. The angels said that Jesus was alive. That's what they said, but they did not believe it. They could not believe. Who could believe such a thing? They had so many questions, like what will become of them and their friends? Can they go back to their old lives? Will they get arrested like Jesus? Will they turn on each other like Judas? But the one question that gnawed at them the most, the question they had no answer for, was, why? Why did all this happen? They were like sheep without a shepherd, all of Jesus' friends scattering, going in different directions, walking into the darkness, though, wherever they went. But for these two, as they walk along, a stranger joins them and they talk. Why Jesus didn't come out and say, hey, it's me, I don't know, but he didn't, and the two disciples did not recognize him. Seems strange that they would not know him, but not too strange, partly because Jesus was dead. They knew he was dead, and dead is dead. But also because it is the nature of sorrow and anger and bitterness that we become blind to others and see not possibilities, nor hear what we might learn if we would only listen, but feel only our pain. Even to his friends, the ones who knew him best, even when he was alive, Jesus had been something of a mystery, someone they did not fully understand or see for who he was, not at first, not for a while, not till later, not on the Mount of Transfiguration, not when he walked on water, not when he healed the leper and cast out demons, not when he talked about prodigal sons and good Samaritans and lost sheep, and certainly not when he was crucified and died. Well, Jesus asked the two on the road what they were talking about. Dumbfounded, flabbergasted, gobsmacked, they stand still. They say, aren't you from around here? Have you been in England for the last 2 weeks, or perhaps out in space? Don't you know what's been happening? Don't you know anything? You know the type. The people who don't watch C-SPAN or read the Biblical Archaeology Review like we do. No, people don't know nothing. People who haven't seen all the Oscar-nominated movies don't know Avril Lavigne from Cape Canaveral. Anyway, they proceed to tell Jesus all about himself. Only it's maybe not exactly the testimony Jesus was hoping to hear. They tell him that he was a mighty prophet who they expected to redeem Israel. But instead he died. And now they are sad and disappointed. Disappointed in what happened, for sure, but also by implication disappointed, perhaps it seems, in Jesus himself, because he wasn't what they wanted him to be. But you know, he never promised to save their nation, to free them from bondage, to bring them prosperity and glory, to make their nation great again. He only promised to save them from their blindness, their hopelessness, their selfishness, their self-righteousness, their hatred, their greed, in other words, their sin. He promised to save them from sin and death, the death that is sin, the death that is grief, the death that is final and forever. Oh, when Jesus hears what these disciples had to say about him, he calls them foolish. And he launches into an impromptu Bible study, taking them through the scriptures from Moses to the prophets, and with every chapter and verse, he explained that the Messiah had to undergo suffering and death. It made sense, I guess. Should have made sense. They'd heard it before 6 times, I think Pastor Debbie said a few weeks ago. 6 times he had told them that everything that was going to happen had to happen as it did. This time, though, the way he explained it, I guess, it was not like he explained it before, maybe, or it was certainly not like other teachers explain things. This time it seemed new, exciting, intriguing, refreshing. It seemed right and true. It seemed like their hearts were on fire. And yet, he still remained a stranger to them. Still, they did not know him. What these two on the road needed was more than a little time to think about all that he said. Fortunately, though hope was gone and faith was fragile, they still had that love that abides when nothing else does. They still knew how to offer hospitality to a stranger. From childhood, they'd heard how Father Abraham offered hospitality and a meal to 3 strangers who made Abraham a promise that in a few months' time Sarah was going to have a baby. And they remembered how Sarah laughed because she couldn't believe that. Who could believe such a thing? She was as old as dust, almost dead. What hope had she for a new life? Well, it was late, it was getting dark, and they invited Jesus to stay with them. And accepting the invitation, Jesus went into their home, and when it came time for supper, the guest became the host. As he took bread, he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. There was something familiar about the way he did that, I suppose. The words he spoke, the way he held the bread, the way he looked them in the eye when he gave it to them, so that then they remembered, then they knew how he was betrayed, how he was arrested, his body broken, his blood shed, and they understood. In the breaking of bread, they recognized him. And in that moment of recognition, their grief for what once was, their disappointment in what would never be, their fear and worry about what might be, all of it vanished, just as he did. But though he was now gone, they would never have to feel alone again, for he left them a promise, a presence that is a peace beyond understanding. And with that, they hurried back to Jerusalem to tell the others. They went as those who have seen the light racing toward the dawn of a new day. But now, whenever we approach the altar for communion, we may bring our disappointing agendas, our sorry witness, our weary hearts, and all that needs forgiving. I say we may, not in the sense of we might do this or we might do that. I say may in the sense that we have permission to do that. And sometimes, we get the story about Jesus right. Sometimes we get it all wrong. Consumed by worry and pain and disappointment and fear and bitterness, we don't tell the story like it ought to be told. We fail to see God in our midst. We fail to be a witness to hope, to joy, to life. Fortunately, we serve a good and gracious God who comes even to those who aren't looking for him, does not abandon us when we're lost and confused, wandering in the wilderness or wandering in the dark, but instead comes and walks with us on the way that his love for us and for the world might become clear. God, in all of God's mercy, is ever present there. In the sacrament, we see Christ for who he is, for he brings everything to the table. We need only bring our profound need of him and our mustard seed of faith. He comes in weakness that we might become strong. He becomes poor that we might become rich. He is broken that we might be made whole. He comes like us that we might become like him, that we might extend our table and welcome the stranger and share a meal with the hungry and offer rest for the weary, and in so doing, any old ordinary meal may become a sacrament of love and a means of grace. When we take the bread and bless it and break it, remembering the one who is a stranger, who though the master became a servant, who is the one to whom offerings are due, yet became a sacrifice to end all sacrifices, who though dying became comfort and consolation, the one who was, who is, and always will be. Strangers may become friends, and friends be blessed. Thanks be to God. Amen.